really early years, childhood experience, you're amazingly close.
Yeah.
And yes, you know.
Most of the time.
Short family, and we generally mean it when it's a short family, because over 10 years we're going to have a big family.
The news was made with very little notice, yet it was impossible to understand what it meant to the Overlook. Prince William and Princess Catherine were relocating their family to Windsor Great Park's Forest Lodge, establishing a new private center of gravity within the monarchy. However, behind what seemed to be a family move was something much more explosive. Growing opposition to Queen Camilla's power, a furious altercation with her, and a disagreement pertaining to the future succession, the most delicate topic of all. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any updates before we delve further into what this actually implies for the royal family. William comprehended instantly that this action would be viewed as much more than a simple address change. Forest Lodge, a sizable Windsor Great Park's royal house, provided seclusion, separation, and something the prince felt more and more. His household was no longer in charge of its own borders. From a different perspective, Catherine perceived the same threat. The Princess of Wales was aware that their kids needed stability, but she also recognized that the conflict with Camilla had gone beyond schedules, trips, and housekeeping choices. The future itself had been reached. For this reason, when confirmation, "Is there any way back from this?" she whispered to her husband when the move finally came, did not respond right away. He was aware that allegiance to King Charles remained crucial, as the ruler was not just his father rather than his sovereign, and each argument with Camilla had the possibility of becoming an internal wound. However, he was also aware that George, Charlotte, and Louis could not develop in a setting where the family's choice became a part of a larger power battle. The legal order that determines the line of succession, who takes the throne, was never intended to be changed by personal pressure. And Camilla had relocated in William's thoughts, uncomfortably close to considering future royal duties as something she could assist in managing. Camilla had previously resisted during a private Windsor gathering. William had heard her contend that closer collaboration was necessary for the monarchy's future, particularly as George approached the duties that awaited him. At first, Catherine said nothing, but she saw her husband's face tighten. Then the time arrived when altered everything. William told the Queen, after closing the folder in front of him and glancing squarely across the table, that she had no authority over decisions pertaining to his children's constitutional future. The space became motionless. Camilla did not back down. Rather, her response transformed disagreement into conflict. Long after the meeting was over, Catherine still felt the impact of that conversation. William also did. Now, Forest Lodge stood for more than just seclusion. It symbolized being cut off from a royal. He felt that the surroundings had grown too invasive. And that's why the relocation was so important. William wasn't giving up on a duty. He was constructing a line around the family that would eventually become the focal point of the monarchy. The Forest Lodge was, consequently, it wasn't just William and Catherine's destination. The transfer was so significant because of what they were leaving behind. Behind each royal, human anxieties of conflict are rarely apparent from outside the walls of a palace. William was afraid he would lose control of the future he was getting ready to inherit. Catherine was concerned that their kids would experience instability. Camilla had a whole different fear. The slow loss of the power she had battled for decades. All of a sudden, Forest Lodge became the location where those anxieties collided, transforming personal conflicts into an emotional battle they couldn't just walk away from. William was simultaneously responsible for two tasks that were inextricably linked. Since he was anticipated to consider the title of Prince of Wales, which is customarily borne by the heir preparing to become monarch, the crown, public obligation, and the institution's future form. However, he was also a father to Charlotte, George, and Louise. Therefore, family life was directly impacted by any disagreement about scheduling, access, or royal planning. Catherine recognized that pressure right away. Although Windsor kept them near official responsibilities, Forest Lodge provided something just as significant: stronger restrictions on children's access to their parents' personal choices. William paced by himself, following yet another challenging conversation with Camilla, trying to comprehend why every effort to establish boundaries had been seen as animosity. He had no desire to go to battle with the Queen Consort. He desired a room. However, Camilla is becoming more saw his independence as a threat to the power she had established alongside Charles. The current court, the network, Coordination was crucial for the sovereign's advisors, royal families, and working connections, and she thought William was starting to distance itself from the building. He had a radically different perspective on the same movement. He saw independence as preparation rather than resistance. At last, Catherine revealed to him what he had been attempting to ignore. He was no longer only tired from the argument, it was altering the environment in which their kids lived. William ceased to move. That statement went beyond any discussion about protocol, because the one duty he would not compromise was to defend George, Charlotte, and Louis. After dinner later that night, she discovered him by himself and put her hand next to his on the table. She made no mention of titles, power, or succession. She only stated that their kids required a home where no choice became a palace dispute. Camilla sensed the walls closing behind her. She had less chances to influence the next stage of royal life, as Williams gained more authority over his household. Life, and she felt uneasy about that loss. Then Catherine found something much more unsettling. In private discussions, she thought had stayed between her and William had gone deeper than she had anticipated through the royal household. No, public disclosure ensued, but the princess was persuaded that their limitations were already established by the recorded internal account of those discussions, weaker than they thought. When Catherine informed William what she had discovered, he listened, and his annoyance turned into determination. However, Forest Lodge was not the actual start of this rupture. One private altercation had already shoved him weeks prior toward the realization that resistance was no longer as safe as silence. In order to comprehend William's ultimate decision to maintain distance, the narrative must go back to the time when a personal dispute violated a boundary that, in his opinion, should never have been crossed. Every family breakup has a seemingly routine moment, held everything that follows is evaluated in relation to what transpired there. That moment for William occurred during a private conversation regarding upcoming royal duties at Windsor. What started out as a discussion about schedules and family responsibilities abruptly turned to Prince George, the succession, and the management of the next generation. William had previously put up with the dispute. However, when Camilla expressed her opinion on how such choices ought to be made, tolerance vanished. William had been frustrated for weeks before he walked into that meeting. Entry to his home, the role of advisors, family schedules, and ceremonial planning had all become sources of conflict. However, he had frequently opted for moderation since the monarchy might suffer from an open rift between the heir and the king's household. This caused Charles great pain. Catherine had advised the same prudence. Nevertheless, she grew more uncomfortable when practical preparedness was not the only topic of debate regarding George's future duties. A ceremonial position just denotes a formal royal duty performed during festivities or official occasions. However, she was concerned with the idea that these responsibilities might open doors to more extensive control over the boy's destiny. Camilla had a different perspective on the issue. She thought that the monarchy required a single, well-coordinated center of power, particularly as William got ready for more responsibilities, and George became more in line with the public's expectations regarding his position within the family. He considered his opposition as parental protection, while the Queen perceived it as rebellion, when she suggested that William's transition duties and the future prince's ceremonial preparation should be organized within a broader royal framework, where she anticipated a significant voice. The prince turned down the concept right away. At first, his response was composed, but it was unambiguous. Catherine sensed almost immediately the tone of the conversation shifts. Camilla persisted, claiming that no future ruler could function without regard to the framework that surrounds the existing sovereign. William responded that constitutional succession was different from ceremonial cooperation. The legal system that decides who inherits the throne is known as succession. Additionally, he clarified that it could not be altered by choice, influence of the family. A recorded private account of the meeting claims that this distinction became the focal point of the dispute solidified. When Camilla pushed back once again, William stood up. Catherine uttered his name once in a low voice, attempting to halt the conflict from going over another line. Putting both hands on the table, he assured the Queen that his offspring would not end up as parts of someone else's try to influence the future. The silence that ensued felt more final than yelling, and Camilla did not back down, could ever do so. There was no reconciliation at the end of the conference. At last the argument had a memory, a sentence. and a boundary William felt had been broken, and everyone would have to admit it at the next meeting. No one went into the second confrontation, thinking that the argument could still be ignored, which made it different. William was upset. Catherine was on guard. When Camilla arrived, she was determined not to cede control because her techniques were criticized by the Prince of Wales. What transpired wasn't a pointless shouting match. It was something riskier, a frontal dispute about royal power, familial boundaries, and if the future king would welcome anyone trying to run his household from above. William had asked for the discussion following discovering that in spite of his prior concerns, conversations regarding his living circumstances were still ongoing. The official title of the successor to the British Monarchy, Prince of Wales, recognized that cooperation between. He thought the boundary had moved from cooperation to intervention, but royal houses were unavoidable. Catherine attended since the dispute now affected their kids, their house, and the nature of family life in general. What had started out as a disagreement between him and Camilla had spread to the whole Wales home. Camilla rejected that description. She maintained that while Charles was still alive, distinct royal families could not act as independent kingdoms, sovereign, and she maintained that important choices needed to be made within a larger framework. After listening, William responded with the distinction he had been attempting for weeks. The issue was not coordination, it was controlled. Calmly supporting him, Catherine explained that choices had an impact on George, Charlotte, and Louis, Dravi to start with their parents. The message hit hard, yet her tone remained calm. George was then raised by Camilla. She questioned whether Williams was becoming more self-reliant and how the youngster would ultimately be ready for his constitutional destiny. Strategy can lead to misunderstandings about upcoming obligations. In this context, constitutional destiny implied that a person's legal and public role was waiting for them due to their position in the succession. William responded right away. His voice shifted. He informed her that she had entered his area, refused to compromise as advice on ceremonial preparation was one thing, but pressure regarding his sons, another was the future. Before Camilla did, Catherine noticed something in the interaction. William had already made a choice. Forest Lodge was no longer only a possibility that was considered behind closed doors. It was now the solution. A recorded internal account of the exchange states that when Camilla informed him, he may not just walk away if decisions made at the palace caused him discomfort. William gave her a direct look and replied that he was not stepping away from his responsibilities. He was keeping his family out of the way. Catherine stated nothing, since there was nothing else to say. Camilla knew exactly what that meant. Taking a stand against, in one conflict, Camilla would explain to King Charles why his successor now felt that distance was essential, very distinct emotional cost. The one man at the center of the conflict was unable to act impartial, not tolerate a public family breakup. William's father and Camilla's husband was King Charles, the institution's ruler. They each thought they were defending. There was no straightforward royal order that could resolve the dispute when it got to him. Whatever he did would seem like a decision between two allegiances, and the act of remaining silent was quickly becoming a decision with repercussions. When William finally explained why the ongoing boundary disputes had grown unbearable, Charles listened without interruption because of his constitutional status and the legal power he possesses as a sovereign under Britain's monarchy, the king's enormous duty. However, this did not imply that each family member could influence succession in accordance with personal preferences. Camilla had a huge intimate sway over her spouse. However, William maintained that influence could not be used to make choices regarding his household, his offspring, or the inheritance hierarchy. The prince's expectations of autonomy had expanded along with his duties as heir. William talked with caution, but each statement felt more weighted because of the restraint. He informed his father that one disagreement, one gathering, or one poorly chosen statement was no longer the issue. There was a pattern. Catherine required security. He wanted space to plan for the future, without worrying that every choice could be reopened elsewhere. And George, Charlotte, and Louis needed safety from the ongoing royal conflict. Charles remained silent. The prince could not tell if his father understood or was just taking in the charge, so that silence stung more than resistance. Camilla sensed the push coming from the other side. She saw herself as being held accountable for attempting to impose order on houses that were heading in various directions in a documented private account of the family conflict. Coordination, in her opinion, safeguarded the monarchy. William thought she had mastered control over her coordination. Charles now realized that making his son stay in an arrangement he felt was intrusive may lead to a long-lasting rift between sovereign and heir, something worse than momentary humiliation. At last, Charles made the unmistakable choice. William would not be told to leave Forest Lodge by him. The Wales family's autonomous home base could move forward, letting the boundaries Camilla had opposed be drawn by the future monarch. Although it wasn't a public reprimand, it instantly altered the situation. After his son departed, Charles stayed seated. He took off his spectacles, set them next to the relocation documents, and muttered that he had never intended for the family to get to this stage. Camilla knew just what it meant when he refused to step in. By letting William leave, the monarch created a new royal boundary, even if he had not openly taken sides. Rarely do royal judgments blow up once and vanish. They make their way through hallways, journals, homes, security plans, and family discussions until everyone realizes that something has changed. The argument ceased to be theoretical after Forest Lodge was established. William was heading out. Catherine was getting the kids ready. Charles had permitted it, and Camilla was forced to confront what she had resisted, the boundaries of her potential, after making a choice she had been unable to undo. With an odd mix of relief and melancholy, Catherine worked through the practical details. Forest Lodge would provide the family with a more distinct private base, while keeping them within Windsor's royal sphere. This was important since it let William to stay near to duty, without letting every domestic decision become a shared palace affair. The family structure, private employees, and Wales' home around the prince, his wife, and their kids were now being reconstructed around more defined boundaries. Although she had never intended for the relocation to appear to be a breakup, maintaining stability for George, Charlotte, and Louis had taken precedence over maintaining appearances. Camilla's response was quite different. She interpreted Charles's approval of the move as evidence that William might now oppose her and maintain the king's backing. It was painful to realize that. The Queen viewed the choice as a humiliation disguised as a compromise in a documented private account in the aftermath, because it essentially diminished her authority to influence conversations within the Wales. Meanwhile, William started restricting access to discussions about the kids, plans for the future, and private choices. He was not excluding the monarchy. He was choosing which doors the larger household could no longer open. Before anyone else said it clearly, Charles recognized the threat. He warned Camilla that succession could not be the focus of personal rivalry and requested her to talk to him in private. The monarch made it clear that he would not put up with the line of succession, the legal order that determines who receives the crown, being used as a family bargaining weapon. Camilla looked at him for a moment before posing the obvious question. Did he really think she had attempted to go too far? Charles paused. There was more to that pause than he had intended. Before he finally stated that some borders now belonged to William, Camilla turned aside. Despite their quietness, the words altered the significance of everything that had transpired. The Queen was still in power, but at last she had seen the limits of that effect. The pressure started to release for William. However, Catherine was aware that the conflict's revelations could not be resolved by distance alone. She realized that Forest Lodge may be the start of a new royal future or an escape from stress. William ultimately had to face a question bigger than Camilla once the dispute had run its course and the move was inevitable. If he were in charge of the future, what would he do differently? The pivotal moment came without counselors, courtiers, or constitutional language. After weeks of disputes over authority, Catherine and William were by themselves. No Charles, no Camilla, no palace go-between who could convert feeling into etiquette. Catherine posed a straightforward query to her spouse. Was Forest Lodge just a way out of trouble, or was it the start of the family life they wanted to safeguard? William's response changed the meaning of the move. Regardless of the crown that ultimately sat on his head, William realized that being far away did not equate to retreating. Without allowing every personal family decision to become a part of a larger royal conflict, the future king might nevertheless fulfill public role, assist the sovereign, and get ready for the duties that lay ahead. Forest Lodge was equally personal to Catherine. For as long as possible, she wanted George, Charlotte, and Louis to maintain regular rhythms. The Wales household, the family, and the staff structure surrounding the prince, his wife, and their children could serve the monarchy while simultaneously defending a private center that was theirs, even as public expectations around them increased. At last, William acknowledged what the encounter with Camilla had triggered in him. He was afraid of more than just losing an argument. It involved witnessing obligation gradually erode relationships until family members were unable to distinguish between duty and affection. He knew how rapidly it could occur since he had seen enough royal history. After listening, Catherine reminded him that it was not necessary to replicate every emotional pattern passed down from earlier generations in order to become king eventually. She warned him that altering those patterns could be one of the most challenging tasks he would ever do. The question he had been avoiding was then posed by Catherine. Was he sorry he had challenged Camilla? William gave a headshake. He expressed remorse for the extent of the argument, but not for the current limit. Something more profound than the actual maneuver was resolved by his response. George would gradually get ready for what lay ahead, prioritized by his parents over conflicting judicial interests. The boy's early years would not be dominated by succession politics, the pressures and scheming surrounding who will eventually inherit the throne. William came to a solid conclusion regarding Camilla as well. He would still treat her with deference due to the Queen, but he would no longer tolerate unofficial influence over issues that he believed were only relevant to his own household. The rage that had fueled the situation eventually subsided as Catherine reached across the table. Consensus. Now Forest Lodge was more than just a place to go away. Before that future was imposed upon them, it stood for the kind of future they desired to create. The family had decided what the move meant in private. What the action seemed to imply about the monarchy itself would now be up to the public. Forest Lodge ceased to be solely William and Catherine's property as soon as the announcement was made public. Every detail was deciphered. Every partnership was re-evaluated. Was this just a family looking for more seclusion? Or had Britain just seen the heir apparent discreetly set up a court inside a court? A domestic move suddenly carried the weight of a royal power shift seen far beyond Windsor, as the Camilla dispute deepened that view. William didn't like how quickly the story engulfed everything around it. The purpose of the action had been to keep Catherine and the kids safe. However, their personal choice was suddenly becoming a national power struggle due to headlines. Suddenly, the Wales household, the family, employees, and advisors who directly assisted the prince and his immediate relatives were being seen as potential future centers of power. Forest Lodge kept them near Windsor and royal duty, which Catherine could understand, but it also provided them with a break from the conflicts that had made everyday family decisions more challenging. The coverage seemed harsher to Camilla. The public debate seemed to her like a conclusion on a conflict that was never intended for public assessment. Her annoyance was captured in a recorded palace briefing, when observers characterized William's move as a rejection of meddling. She felt that description eliminated all of her coordination-related arguments and reduced the disagreement to a single charge: control. The Queen was aware that the distinction was important, but she also understood that complexity seldom endured once the audience agreed on a straightforward narrative. The headlines circulated more quickly. Television presenters portrayed Forest Lodge as the most obvious indication, yet that the future king was building a more autonomous basis for the responsibilities that lay ahead. One London morning edition included a large photograph of William and Catherine with the words, "A new Windsor chapter." A crucial distinction was added by constitutional analysts. According to succession, the legal rules deciding who inherits the crown could not be privately rewritten by individual members of the royal family, however powerful or close to the sovereign they might be. When cameras and supporters started congregating close to Windsor, Catherine was particularly affected by the human cost. While one woman gave her flowers, another told a presenter that the couple ought to be free to raise their kids any way they see fit. When William learned of the remark, he experienced both thankfulness and unease. As the argument intensified, Charles realized that the palace's silence was now preferable to denial. Camilla had the same understanding. There was only one question that mattered once the headlines subsided. Had Forest Lodge split the kingdom, or at last compelled it to draw borders that would keep it intact? Ultimately, the significance of Forest Lodge was not determined by the outcome of a dispute. Camilla has had to face boundaries. Charles had been compelled to acknowledge his son's autonomy. William had been forced to decide between defending his family's limits and avoiding confrontation. Catherine had felt compelled to transform her fear into determination. Uncomfortable but obvious was what came out. The future monarchy could not be established by letting family trust or constitutional responsibilities be subordinated to private control. William knew the relocation had cost him something when he arrived at Forest Lodge. His relationship with his father had been strained by his encounter with Camilla, but in his own house, quiet would have been more costly. The prince realized that the legal system that determines who inherits the throne, known as constitutional succession, could not be used as a vehicle for private negotiations influenced by individual preferences. His opposition was never about asserting unbridled authority. In the case of George, Charlotte, and Louis in particular, it was about preserving the boundary between constitutional authority and family influence. Instead of feeling victorious, Catherine felt relieved. She had never wanted Charles to have to choose between his wife and his son, nor had she wanted Camilla to be defeated. She desired a more straightforward home where her kids could develop without each personal choice turning into a royal competition. Now, with agonizing clarity, William recognized that need. Not only did Forest Lodge provide them with space, but more significantly, it offered them a boundary that they had jointly decided upon. Charles also came to his own decision. The king acknowledged that his son's independence did not amount to insurrection. It was getting ready. Before he could be expected to lead the institution around his family, an heir to the throne had to learn how to defend it. Camilla stayed by the sovereign's side, maintaining his love and trust. However, the situation set a boundary that she could no longer disregard. William's family and the succession itself were not under the monarch's authority. After the last arrangements were made, William turned to Catherine and assured her that they were not fleeing anything. They were choosing what had to stay behind and what belonged in their future. She grasped it right away. All four of them had suffered as a result of the dispute, but it had also compelled the monarchy to grow with bravery, moderation, and clarity. And concealed behind the relocation to Forest Lodge was the real announcement. The future king and queen had finally decided on the limits of the monarchy they planned to inherit. Not that William and Catherine had selected a different